Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all of us. And I would like to give a couple of minutes for others to join us. And I would like to start with one question to Atulesh. How many years have you been working as a business analyst, and most like you work with the user stories?
Yes, so in industry, I'm working for 15 plus years experience and around 10 plus years experience. I've been into a business analyst role. And apart from business analyst, I have played a role of product owner, product manager as well. So for this user stories, it has been like overall journey because we were working into agile mode of our work deployment. So it's all completely was on user stories entire. Like if I split like in 10 years of my career, so there was couple of projects where we followed even waterfall. So but there my stories and information like all requirements was provided in different documentation for, and that was not called user stories. But when I started working into agile, scrum and kanban mode, so there was all requirements we captured into user stories. So epic and user stories. Yeah. So you can consider
Sounds
more than,
great.
means around 10 years experience. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds like you definitely have a lot of experience to share with our audience and our colleagues.
Right. I hope.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I would like to start with a little information from our community, and then we can come to our webinar. So we're continuing the series of the events dedicated to one of the main tools of every business analyst, and this is user story. So today we will have our next webinar, User Story Decomposition, an approach to more effective development. Our speaker, Atulesh, will summarize his knowledge and experience about different techniques for good user stories, decomposition techniques, and different approaches for this, and a couple of words about acceptance criteria. A couple of additional moments from our global BA community. A recording will be provided after the presentation. You can send questions in the chat during the event, and we will read it at the end of our webinar. Also, you can give thank you badges for the speakers, and also it's possible to put a rating on the event page. And one more point, that we have one activity during the events. Will you please mute? Thanks. And we have one activity during the events. At the end, the speaker will choose the best question in his opinion, and they also will receive the badge. So do not be shy and ask your questions. And now I suppose that we can start our webinar. Atulesh, the floor is yours.
Yes. So welcome to team. Welcome to this session, and I hope most of us or you, whoever is in this presentation, are from the business analysis community. They have joined it. If not, please join, because that's a very informative community. Okay. And to start with this topic, already we see this is, we are going to talk about user story decomposition and basically approach for more effective development approach when we follow, right? So this topic will cover following sections. In this, I will walk through. First part will be on techniques of good user stories. Next, since I'm talking about user story decomposition, so I would like to touch base what is decomposition and why we want to do it, right? Then the next section will be about approach and technique we should follow in the decomposition when we go for user story decomposition. At the end, it will be acceptance criteria in user stories when we are going to decompose, and overall like what we should consider in the acceptance criteria. And finally, floor will be for you to ask your questions, right? I'll move to next slide. So this is little about me. I've completed 1.5 years in EPAM. As I previously said, that I worked into business roles as a business analyst, product owner, product manager specifically, and also have supported my team in pre-sales activity and sometimes SIT and UAT activities. I worked into multiple business areas which were related to insurance, majorly into telecom, some part in e-commerce and gamification, and a bit in retail and distribution areas. Apart from that, I have worked with software product industries as well. So they were working into a specific product for their organization related to BPM and all. Overall, my journey was into business analyst role, and initially my career was into software testing QA. Okay. And then gradually I moved into business analyst product manager role. Okay. So with this, I will start the first section, like user story techniques and types. So there we will be, I will move quickly to next about user stories. Since most of us are working into business analyst role, and some of us are also following product owner or product manager or product management side of their experience. So most of us are also working into Agile, Scrum or Kanban or different Agile methodology. And we all talked about a lot on user stories. Okay. And also last in March month, we had one session in our VR community where one of our colleagues has talked a lot about user story. So that's where I concise this section as a small. If we want to go and refer more detail on that user story, so I have provided the link. You can refer this recording and get to know more detail about the user stories. Okay, but still I would like to touch what technique we should follow to have a good user stories. So everybody, since we are business analysts, product owners, product managers, so our focus is always towards business. And basically we see our product or project should focus for business requirement and the business which will help us for the end users need, right? What is their need? And to implement that need based on our project when we are performing project activities. So what's our goal? So according to that goal, we will be focusing on our business need, business goal to make the user story better, right? And also like we are working in a team with different locals, different team members, right? Diverse culture. Everybody is having different style of writing stories, different languages, though our business communication is English, but everybody is having different way of writing. We will be focusing technical stories, where technical requirements, functional requirement, non-functional requirements. So we try to write a story in our own way. And since our stories will be read by or used by our other colleagues who are developer or testers, or it will be discussed with our client. So everybody needs to understand it, right? So we try to make it like, as long as this story is simple, meaningful, making our business values, reaching to project goal. So aligning that, we always see, make it simple language so that it's easy to understand and easy to take it forward. Next is our involving stakeholders, right? So why it is required? When we are talking, who will be our stakeholders? So it will be business users or with whom I am discussing for the requirement. And once I capture the requirement, whom I am going to discuss and going to explain this. So it will be our developer, testers, or whoever is joining into our project. So our product owners, product managers, when sometimes we have to perform UATs. So who will be the end users involving in this project? So with all the stakeholders, we need to keep consult. We need to get their feedback and try to see whether the expected that is available in our user stories. If it is not meeting, it means it's not going to give good end results. So this need to be there. User personas, and we need to follow some consistent approach. So if you see in the top of that slide, there is, I've given that consistent approach, like when we write user story, we create a format like as an user type. I want to perform some activities so that I achieve something, I get something, right? So a format is given and we try to inculcate and try to make all the requirements, all the criteria, everything matches this consistent format. And user personas means who all will be the actors involved in this, in that stories, right? In that activities. So we try to make it. So that details when I'm going to show this decomposition, there I will be talking more details about that part. Okay. Then when we are writing a story, so there will be so many textual formats, right? Textual things. So it's always easy if we try to represent the ask, the business goal or the requirement as much as possible in pictorial format. It could be a simple flow diagram. It could be UML diagram or business process modeling language we follow. So all those kind of diagrams, again, like if some requirement needed any kind of data modeling, provide that data modeling. Or if we need any kind of wireframe or screens, so provide those information. So as much as we support with visual pictorial way, so it always helps someone to understand what is the ask, right? So that will always be an advantage along with our textual way of writing stories. Then the last point is refine until it is ready. Refine means since we are working in agile world, every time we keep on accepting, means we are ready to accept changes and also ready to get feedback and accept the changes, right? And when we capture requirement, sometimes we are not too technical, understand the complexity of architecture and whether that requirement is feasible at this point or not, right? So all these things we get to know feedback all when I capture requirement, functional requirement or any such some requirements from my business, and when I discuss with my architect or technical team, so we get to know some feedback, and based on mutual understanding and mutual discussions, we take it forward, like what agreement has happened and how it has happened, right? So that's like involve the stakeholders I told and refine, right? So as much as I involve with my stakeholders, we get feedback, discuss and have a room for refinement of our story. Once the story is ready, we deploy it. Again, we get feedback. We try to optimize that story, maybe in next iterations, right? So that way we try to take it and we see that, okay, if refinement is also possible, and that we do it until finally it's ready, right? So overall, all these things helps us to create our story better, useful, meaningful, right? And all to summarize all those things, we say that, okay, our story, whether our story follows invest guidelines. This is a one simple criteria. Everybody in most of the stories we try to cross check, cross verify whether my story follows invest guidelines or not. And that's about invest is about making all stories should be independent. It should be negotiable, valuable, estimable, and small. So I will not touch base this as a more detail because you can follow through our previous session by one of our colleagues. That video recording is having all the details about invest principle guidelines and more details about the user story. So with this, I will proceed next. Yeah, so I wanted to say, okay, we already talked about like user stories. So there are multiple kind of user stories we will have, right? Some we know that functional, some non-functional and technical. So one example, like if how we will identify something is functional, non-functional or technical. So one example is given with simple user stories. If we want to check a functionality, we want to say that one example is as a user, I want to able to search for products by name so that I can view and get the details of it. So this is one functional part. Now as a non-functional, we want to check how much time it takes to respond when I'm searching the product, whether it takes 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 second, 2 seconds, what's the, and whether this search is a global search or local search. So all those things comes into picture, how much time it takes, right? So that aspects we take that we take as a non-functional, and technical aspects will be if it's a new code developer has to write, or if there is some kind of migration or some kind of optimization. So whether they need to refactor or the code or what they need to do it, right? So those parts and all we get to know as much as we try to talk with our stakeholders, as much as we collaborate and try to analyze the requirement in different angle, functional, non-functional, and technical aspects. That way we try to categorize user stories. Okay. Then I will go to the next, decomposition of story. So when I talked about user stories having good quality and the types of user stories, so in each types we see it why we want to decompose. So before that, what is decomposition? So it's a plain English word where we want to make it like its meaning is making something small, making parts by parts. Okay. So for stories also we want to make it smaller, and we will see in the next slide why, and techniques and approaches. Any requirements when we discuss with our customers or client, or when either product owner or product manager with whom we are discussing and we are trying to get the requirements. So we see that all requirements have different nature. Some could be complex, small, or medium complex. They may have a smaller functionality, bigger functionality. It could be plain, easy to understand, and it could be so complex, so vague that it's very, very difficult for us to understand. And that's where our capability also comes into picture. Whether if it's some requirement is complex, is my story is also going to be complex? Is I'm covering all those functionality, big functionality in single stories or multiple stories, or these functionalities, how means I'm going to cover in my each user stories. So that angle we need to see, and whether like requirement is not very clear, am I going, is my story is also vague? So these kind of things may come up. So to avoid all this complexity, the nature of big functionality, or it's not clear, so to make it understandable, meaningful, and aligned with the project goal, we try to break it. Break means we will try to decompose or split all those bigger requirements or complex requirements in a simpler format, small functionalities. Make it small piece by piece and make it clear. At least try to understand one piece, link it with next piece of item, and see each piece are giving value to us. So that's one principle for Agile also, like each piece, each requirements or whatever delivery we are going, it should be having some values. So when I'm writing user stories, I'm splitting it. So it should be meaningful, it should be small, it should be easy to understand, and it should provide some value to the customer, value to the project. At the end goal is what is users need. So we need to see in that angle. Okay. So that way we try to see, and that also helps us when for any project release, when we plan for sprints, right? And we see that in one of the sprint, what all items we are covering, what all product features we are trying to develop and release it to the customer, right? So we try to see in a sprint what all smaller stories has been there and how they are dependent to each other, so that in one release we can complete it and deliver it without making it dependable to the item which is going to be developed in the next sprint. If some stories or some items are in the first sprint which is dependent on the next sprint's item, so it will be difficult for us to deliver, and in that case we will fail the nature of independence of a story. Okay, and that's where we have a high risk of failure of our sprint, or we need to go with some kind of alignment or some kind of adjustment to make that release for that sprint, right? So by making smaller requirement meaningful for this project goal, smaller functionalities, clear statement, independent in nature, so that will help us for successful release sprint by sprints, and that's where we need to decompose the story. Okay. Then we'll see, okay, what are the techniques and approach one need to follow. If we see that this is the first one of the item, like CRUD, we know that CRUD is for full, it's a abbreviation and short form for create, read, update, and delete. So each requirements may have different functionality, and we need to think where we can apply this technique, that's create, read, update, and delete. So that will come if we see some kind of requirement which are operational in nature. So where we see that some kind of user need management, like we need to manage some users or manage some action. So in that, we need, by analyzing the requirement, we have to see whether that there is any nature of creation or update, or user need to delete the records, read, view the data, right? So if we need to analyze, if we are analyzing that, so on that basis, we see that, okay, we have a bigger story, bigger requirement. So how we can decompose? So for create, we can have a smaller requirement, a smaller story. For it, we can write separate story. For update and delete, similarly, we can write a separate story rather than creating one bigger story and keep all those things in a single acceptance criteria for a single story. So in that case, what will be the nature? Like that story will take a lot of time for development, for testing, and for delivery. Okay. So one example, you can see that if as a system administrator, I want to manage list of all users in the system so that I can view and update their account details and settings. So this is one requirement. There, okay. As a BA, I can write this story. I can keep this story, and around that, I can write my all the acceptance criteria or create a multiple tasks and let it go. I can explain to developer and QA and groom the story. But the what challenges we may face, again, like only one developer has to write entire means develop entire story. During that, there may be challenges if he has done one of the tasks, but another task is taking some time, so we cannot easily make this story complete, right? Because it's all in until unless create, read, update, and delete functionality is ready, we cannot test it, we cannot deploy it, right? So to make it simpler, we can decompose the story in different way. Okay, different. So one is like, as a system administrator, I want to create user account in the system so that users account details exist. Similarly, for reading means nothing but viewing that all users record. For view, separate story has been created. Similarly, for update and cancel, we can decompose the story and have it separate stories rather than creating a single story with multiple acceptance criteria, right? So this is the one of the technique that's we call it CRUD. Then next technique is business rules. So we need to identify based on the requirement what all explicit or implicit business rule can be applied or is existing in that for that requirement, and think through like how it can be tested. Also with discussion with our stakeholders, maybe product owner or product manager or the end user with whom I'm dealing with the requirement. We are discussing with the requirement. See what will be the prioritization of a story. There will be multiple rules implemented, and which business rule is on higher priority and it's easy to understand also and easy to develop, so that we can prioritize it first and keep it ready for delivery. Okay, so based on business rule, we need to see, we can decompose the story. So one story as an example, we can see, as a sales representative, I want to be notified when a customer's order is placed so that I can manage the order. So most of the time we see then generally in e-commerce order or some kind of functionality where customer is purchasing something or placing some order. So it's in that situation, we see that, like, as a sales representative, I want to be notified when a customer is placing an order. Okay. If this looks simple, it's still, but again, we need to see what happens if we have some criteria or some business rule applied for my specific order. Okay, so this is a bigger requirement in terms of, like, customer has placed the order, but we may have multiple scenarios, multiple use case with that placing of the order. It could be with minimal amount, minimum number of items added in the cart. If I place the order, I canceled it, or if I see that order has been not completed due to some reasons, right? Or if manager want to be notified, so for notification also, do we have any some rules or not? So some example, this is not like sufficient story, it's example given. So for this original story, there could be 2 or 3 some more decomposition can be done, but with this I'm trying to show you like how we can still decompose this original story into at least into 2 another stories. Okay, so it could be like, okay, as a sales representative, I want to be notified when the customer's order total exceeds $500 so that I can offer them a discount. It could be lesser than 500, it could be higher than 500. Okay, or if it could be some certain amount, so whether I should ask him for delivery charge. So there could be some conditions. So if in the requirement it is given, well and good. If something is not given in the requirement, we need to think through, we need to ask and see how I can implement those things in writing user stories, multiple user stories for our requirement. So basically, as a BA, we need to analyze, think through, and try to make that statement as a high level statement, whatever requirement is given, or as a story or as an epic, something has been given. So how we can decompose it. So think through all those multiple scenarios, even though if it is not given in that business requirement, client has not said, we can think through and we can cross verify, cross check with them. And if we try to provide some points, like I said, I gave one example, like what if order exceeds some amount or order is lesser than some amount, right? So will there be any charges, or if some kind of payment is also happening, so whether that payment mode, like, okay, order, suppose I have ordered for some amount, so for that, what should be my payment mode, whether I will be allowing credit card or debit card or account or cash on delivery or some POS systems. So think through and see what all business rule can be implemented, and try to relate it with your requirement and see how I can break down or create multiple user stories so that piece by piece it can be analyzed, it can be discussed, it can be prioritized, aligned with the sprint, and make it towards the release. Okay, so this is another business rule. This is another technique that's analyzing business rule, and based on business rule, decompose the story. Then I will move to the next. So another technique is workflow steps. So each functionality, each requirements will have some kind of workflow, some kind of Sometimes we say end-to-end user flow. Sometimes we say that different like functional flow, or if we see that if some requirements is only related to backend system side, where we say that data modeling, so the relations between the tables, structures and all. So basically what all systems involves, we analyze, okay, for some requirements we will have some systems involved, some functionalities, some users, actors. So if we are writing in a Word, try to create some kind of user flow diagram or design flow diagram, try to create it so that it gives you some logical, meaningful answers or meaningful approach so that anybody can understand it. And then you try to see how I can break piece by piece and interlinking the functionality. Okay. And based on that, I can create my independent user stories. Okay. So if we see, we have one example, like take one story, like as a content creator, I want to. Yes. Yeah. Hello. Okay. I'll continue. So we see that we have one example is as a content creator, I want to publish a new story to the corporate channel so that the community can read it. Okay. So let's see how we can decompose this story. So again, I say that this is not the only two decomposition. Still, we can analyze and we can create multiple stories. So in this example, we have when I try to decompose it. So the first story we can make it as a content creator. I want to able to submit my draft for review and approval by my supervisor so that I can ensure that quality and accuracy of the content is good enough before I publish. Okay. So the first requirement, if I see that as a story, it was I want to publish a new story in the corporate channel. That was as a content creator, I wanted to publish a new story. But if you see in the practically before publishing, what should happen? Like I will create a content and I will before putting it into that, publishing it into the corporate channel, I will try to get it reviewed. It could be my supervisor or a assigned person who will be checking or cross verifying those contents, whether it's with compliance or with grammatical correct or all kind of compliance, security, so many things, all things are fulfilled or not. So first my draft should be checked, then only it should be published. Okay. So those things I analyze and accordingly I will split it. So one thing, okay, if we have for that kind of requirement, if we see like which all systems are involved. So in this example, you can understand like one thing is like once content is created, it should be supervised, it should be reviewed by the supervisor about the quality and accuracy before going to before reaching to the legal. Okay, once it is approved at one level, then try to get legal review and legal approval. So we know that we have such kind of system, and that's the process. According to the process, we analyzed and try to break the stories, break the requirements, and accordingly formulate that story. Okay. So first was CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Next was our business flow, business rule flow. Third was workflow steps. Let's see what was the next technique. What is the next technique? So this is about platform method. So we try to see when the requirements or the applications being used or who is the end user. So are they interacting on which kind of environment, right? Whether it will be, so platform means it's basically devices as well as OS plus browser combinations, right? Where this application is being used. So if you see someone can be using on desktop or laptop, or now most of people are using mobile devices. So it could be smartphones or tablets. People are using Edge, Chrome or Safari browser or iPhone. So many varieties are there, right? So based on the requirements, whatever I'm getting or the ask. So we need to cross check, we need to verify, get the feedback, and accordingly we need to see that feature where whether it's a web application or newly developed app. So accordingly we need to see in which platform these applications can be delivered. Okay, and what's the requirement, and accordingly we need to split in case we are not splitting the requirement. So take this example. As a traveler, I want to purchase flight ticket online so that booking is confirmed, and I keep this story only. I can, for this also I can write all in the acceptance criteria. Okay, in acceptance criteria 1, that okay, it should be working in Android device. Acceptance criteria 2, it should be working in iPhone, Apple device. Acceptance criteria 3rd, it should be working in laptop or desktop. Take this example, and if I keep this story, so what will happen? For Android, I have different developer. For Java, for iPhone, I have a different developer. For web, suppose I have a different developer, but the story is single. So how I can divide, means how I can align that story or that requirement to different developer, and how QA will be testing it. Suppose a single developer can code for all Android, Apple, or in for web application, right? So suppose there is a single developer, so he will take longer time, and we have shorter sprint, so many dependencies. So it's always better according to platform. Also, we see that the requirement is matching, like what is my priority, and as per priority we can arrange it. Okay, so for that purpose only we try to split the requirement. Okay, if we want hardware dependent, split according to hardware. If it is related to browser, so related to browser we can break it down, and so that each stories will be small, independent, and easily developed and deployed, right? So suppose I want to develop, I want for Apple device, it should be developed later. For Android, if I want to be developed as a first priority. So okay, at least all the stories related where it's dependent on Android phone, that kind of story can be higher priority, and it could be deployed and developed and deployed. We will get feedback. Accordingly, we can see what features we can update or what modifications we can do. We can take it for Android as well as for the next device for Android and all, Apple device and all, right? Like that we can take it forward, and that will be only possible when my stories are small and splitted. Okay, so many times it happens like we write under acceptance criteria all those scenarios or all those situations, but it's always good as an story if we split all those features or all those scenarios or all those action points, everything. As much as we split into the simple stories, it's always easy for development and testing and deployment. So that was on the platform. Then one is the next item is technique is use case method. Okay, so for any scenario, for any requirements, or we can try to see, we need to analyze what all possible scenarios can be there, what all possible scenarios. It could be all happy path related, unhappy path, edge case. So we need to see all possible use case, and that's where, like I was saying, that if for user story we try to create some diagrams and try to create some flow, right? So even for use case also, we can create a diagram, we can create some flows. We have different actors, different scenarios, different business rules. So for all are related and independent as well. So for some use case, we may have different business rule, different flow or different channels, but at the end, they want to achieve same goal or same thing, right? So that we need to analyze and that we need to see, and accordingly we should try to split our story into different scenario, different means we need to split story under according to my use cases, rather than creating it under acceptance criteria all, right? So for that we can go through one example. So we have one original story as the vehicle owner, I want the vehicle to be vehicle to determine the speed limit, okay, and set the speed to a defined limit so that traffic laws are obeyed during the delivery, okay. So if I want to decompose it, we can go it in like, we want to see it, okay, vehicles should determine the speed limit and set the limit as per defined rule, okay. What happens if some places, if on the journey they detect different speed limit sign, so they should read all those different speed limit sign. Sometimes it's a school zone or a hospital zone or some area accident zone or something. So there could be different possibilities where we can have speed limit set instantly. When someone goes, they will see now, or sometimes on the road there could be defined, okay, for schools and hospital at least it's defined. But if you see accidental zone, right, so that's also like somewhere accidental zone is also there, like it's already available. But sometimes on the road you see already accident has happened, but police and the authorities have already placed some rules, some signs that someone should go slow or someone should divert, right? So basically, we need to think through all those use cases, all those scenarios, and try to relate whether and how my requirements can fit through. Okay, and based on that, I will means we need to split the story, and we need to see based on a split only my client or my customers or my business or my stakeholders can tell me, okay, under on which priority we can take the story and align it to the respective sprints, right? So we take all those angles, and that's where like the benefit, and that's where like that's how we try to split the stories. Okay, so this is what this is about. That was about the use case method. Think through all the possible scenarios, discuss, get approval. Okay, and accordingly split the story, prioritize it, and align it with the sprint and take it towards the release. Okay. Then next is hyper fine story splitting. So this is a term used just for us to categorize, but whatever we have covered in the previous, so we can also relate this part over there as well. Okay, so use case when we talked about, or business rules, or some flow diagram or CRUD, right? So we see, so this is about hyper fining. Since we followed all the previous techniques, whatever is mentioned for splitting the story, but still we see that there could be a scope of splitting the story. Still we have a scope to refine that and make it simpler or break it. And that also we get the feedback when we do refinement session or grooming session with the team, or when we try to discuss when we are in the analysis phase of requirement, right? So this is giving a term so that we can remember and analyze it. So 0, 1 and many rule to slice. So what 0, 1 and many means? Something like a business case or scenario or a one use case when you are dealing with nothing. One means when you are dealing something with one thing. And what happens when suddenly there are many things, right? So in that situation, what should happen? So we need to think through. So that's about hyperfining our story while splitting it. So think through 0, 1 and many rule and see it. So as an example, we can see, as a traveler, I want to search a flight for weekend so that I can book ticket for my travel. Okay, so this is my requirement. Okay, some user has to search for flight on weekend, okay, and book his ticket. So for that requirement, person can write a BA or product owner can write a bigger this user story, and accordingly he can split into all those situations, scenarios he can write in acceptance criteria and deliver it, right? But still we have a scope. We see that what happens on weekend if flight is not available. So why user need to search? Why user need to proceed for longer, right? So we can say that, okay, we splitted the story as a traveler. When I search for flight on weekend, and if it is not available immediately, I should be notified rather than proceeding for next steps and all. And that will give a good user experience. Okay. What happens? Only one flight is available on the weekend. That flight may not, that timing may not be suitable for me. Okay. So when we analyze in that way, we write our story and we discuss with the business, we get it prioritized and we align it to sprints or for our delivery. And accordingly, we will take it forward with the development and testing team. Even QA also will find it, because once if we are not doing, it will be a complex in nature, and either we need to be dependent on QA or the ask from development team when they go for development and all, right? So we should try to see how better way we can split this requirement. If you see the third story, so as a traveler, I want to know the list of all flights available on the weekend so that I can book a suitable flight ticket for me. Okay, so that was the scenario for many things. So if we see that example, always that original story looks complete. If we do not know the techniques, we do not know the techniques of writing user stories, why we should do decomposition, what benefit we get it. So as a beginner BA or as a newbie or as an experienced BA, but who has not come through all this situation, who has not got entire experience in the system, so they may face challenges, right? And they will learn through the process. Once they have faced entire challenges, they have faced all the failures, all the success, all the risks, all the feedback, whatever they have got it, right? Or they might have read somewhere or tried to implement in their regular work life, right? So that's where how we see it, like how we can analyze all our requirement, go through multiple techniques of decomposition methods related with business rule, how it can add value to the my project goal and delivery, and accordingly we will write our stories, we will discuss with the team, get feedback, discuss with the stakeholders, get feedback, and we proceed, refine our stories, and we proceed, right? Yeah, so that was the last technique. And then the last section of this today's discussion is the last topic is acceptance criteria. So what should we consider? Okay. So while explaining in the previous section, I've talked about acceptance criteria also, right? I was saying like when we have a major like story which is in a bigger format, or it's a complex, or it consists of multiple functions in a single story. So still we will write acceptance criteria to why? Because to make it fulfill, to achieve, like, okay, that bigger story can be achieved based on certain criteria. Okay. And for certain criteria also we write if we do not split the stories. So what we do, okay, when we understand, okay, what is my criteria to achieve that bigger story, and if I know that, okay, I need to decompose and I need to follow invest principle and make it simpler for my release and project goal. So I split the story, and under each story, I will have my separate acceptance criteria. Okay. And it's always good, and it's a must practice that we should try to follow the acceptance criteria to avoid any risk or confusion or dependency or somewhere like conflicts and all. To avoid such kind of things, we should always try to write acceptance criteria. Okay. And we already talked about we will have functional, non-functional, technical in nature, some requirements, right? So accordingly, we need to see what is feasible, and we need to write information in our acceptance criteria. It should consist of all business scopes specific to that decomposed story, smaller story. Okay. All user experiences, whatever feedback you are getting from customers or from your during refinement or grooming session, whatever feedback you are getting from your team, and see it, whatever is missing, what all gaps are there. Okay, what can be refined. So accordingly, we need to put all those information in the acceptance criteria. Okay, and it should be our acceptance criteria, so means based on, since our story is independent and unique, so even for that also my acceptance criteria should be unique. And since we are talking about each user stories are unique, granular, so our acceptance criteria is always matching with that specific story, specific small business cases, right? So that's about that acceptance criteria. And that's why it is needed, because we are going to get all feedbacks from the business, from the customers, from our all stakeholders, and based on that only we are going to give our sign off and to avoid any kind of discrepancy in the future, right? Okay. Yeah, so I think this was our last part of this session, and with this I'm open for question and answer. And before you ask question and answer, this is my contact, so I can be available to talk about this more, or if you have some other question offline, I can be available here. Okay, so floor is for you now. I think how
Yes.
much time I took.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Atulesh, for first of all for collected, combined, and shared with our audience all your experience and all your knowledges. I suppose it was very and will be very useful. And I would like to start with one practical case from our chat. So set of already decomposed user stories, but not by you or SCBA or but you, but a long time ago, also already estimated and approved. During the review and team brainstorming, it was defined that redecomposition is required with all possible changes in estimation, time, cost, and etc. What will be your recommendations in such a case and best practices or examples for familiarization? Thanks you in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Yeah, so sometimes we see it like multiple ways, like suppose pre-sales has estimation something, or the previous team who worked into maybe within the same organization or from the different organization, some estimate has come and client is quoting based on that estimation. And currently the team who is going to work, they have different opinions about that estimation, right? So always I suggest, or I feel that's a practical, like team need to see what in the current situation, they need to see like, okay, from the business value, if it is matching business value, well and good. If it is not matching business value, what additional things I'm going to provide, and due to that, where the deviations has come for the estimation, right? So we need to always consider from that business value and the customer's need. And also suppose there was there could be a gap also, like, okay, something might be missing, or some might be, there could be old technology used, now we are proposing new technology or new systems, or when we identified some gaps, so we are trying to manage that gap and trying to propose new solution, right? So we need to do some comparative analysis and map the previous requirement from the previous analysis and from the current analysis, and doing those mapping, finding the gap analysis. And due to that, we need to estimate, okay, due to these gaps or due to this mapping, some deviations has come up. So what additional benefit is going to we are going to bring, or what additional values we are going to bring, and why that estimation has increased. So that always comes. So suppose first when initially happened, so there was also some decomposition was not done, some stories was not decomposed and it was complex, right? So we might have missed some angle. Now when things are analyzed and we saw that, okay, this is the new functionalities, and when we drill it down more, then we get it better picture for this estimation. So when something is at high level, our estimate will be practically at high level always. and we try to match there, but at the cost of business value, we should not accept to match the estimation. So always we see that business, what business value we are bringing, and be reasonable with that. Okay. And when we are splitting, definitely we are splitting, and that's the giving granular value. And based on that, we see that, okay, for a small piece, how much time it's going to take. Okay. What all resource will be consumed, right? So that gives a very clear picture. And with that comparative analysis and judgment or information, we can provide the estimate. And I think with that, everybody will be accepting whatever estimate has come up.
Thank you. And we have only 5 minutes left, but I suppose that we can answer 2 more questions, and then you will answer in the written form in the chat. So first question, business rules and use case techniques are similar. So how can we differentiate criteria, tips, properties, them when decomposing user stories?
Yeah, can you repeat? Business rules and?
Business rules and use case techniques are similar. So how can we differentiate them when decomposing user stories?
Yes. So for each business rule, we can have multiple scenarios. Okay. Or for different use case, we can have different business rules, right? So both are tightly coupled. Okay. So when we are defining use case, right? So sometimes what happens when we write one story, and for that we provide different acceptance criteria based on the use case. So acceptance criteria 1 is my use case 1, acceptance criteria 2 is my use case 2, right? So we need to see, suppose for sprint 1, for the current sprint, when we are planning to deliver some backlogs or those requirements or those story. So we need to see with the team, like when we are discussing, like, will it be deliverable? Okay, so it's always good to split those user stories, those use case with different stories. Okay, and try to make business rule. But suppose for single business rule, my I can have different use cases. Okay, use case 1 also trying to match with the same business rule. Use case 2 is also matching with this, going through the same business rule. So we discuss with our architect and developer, like the complexity of development. Okay, so when we define and when we groom the requirement, we groom the story, right? So at the time we get the feedback from the team, right? That's where we are saying that when we are writing a story, we always keep collaboratively working with the team, with our stakeholders. Okay, so we need to see if it's not going to conflict in terms of time or technical complexities or time and the delivery. So that's fine in some cases. Okay, one story you can have multiple use case, but it may not practically work in different scenarios or different business case, where you need to split all the, based on the use cases, you need to split the stories because of some kind of dependency, right? So we need to analyze those parts, and accordingly we need to take it.
Thank you. And one more question, how you would advise to trace dependencies after decomposition?
How I will advise to train the?
To trace dependencies after decomposition.
uh, can you repeat again? How I will be train
Yes,
the,
how you
no,
would
train or?
advise to trace dependencies, how you will connect your decomposed user stories and understand this. For example, this user story is a part of the previous
Okay,
one.
tracing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we are always talking about that business value, right? And then we see that, okay, for my sprint 1, sprint 2, what is my goal, right? So basically business value and the project goal and the sprint goal, I mean to say that accordingly we need to see it. And when we are decomposing the story, So we need to see, okay, one part of that may go in sprint 1, another part in sprint 2. Okay, so we always need to map. Okay, so that mapping need to be there, and based on that mapping only we need to see, we need to decompose, and once that is delivered, so at the end of a sprint or when we are delivering, so we test it, right, and we see that okay, is sprint 1 goal is met or not. Okay, so for that my story has been completed, and then we need to see for the next, right. So basically we need to map with business value and the project goal or the sprint goal, and then when we are aligning for which sprint, and then we need to see, suppose two decomposed stories are aligned in a single sprint, so we need to again see are how both are dependent. So when I'm talking about the mapping, so which item should come first and what should be the ranking, and based on that we need to map and we need to take it forward. So, I will say that understand business value, then your project goal or sprint goal, and then the map, the dependency, and take it on the ranking wise. So that way we can trace it.
Okay, thank you. Time
Hello.
is end, and can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes. So I suppose that our time is over, and thank you for your webinar and for your answers. I suppose that you can answer in the chat later in the written form for all other questions.
Mhm.
And thanks a lot for your time. Join our community and join our webinars.